Hey, welcome to the Mostly Skateboarding Podcast. I'm your host, Templeton, Elliott, and I'm joined this week by Patrick Kigongo to talk with our friend Conor Dougherty about his piece for the New York Times about skating curbs. Conor, thanks for being on the show. The title of the piece is What I Learned About Loss While Skateboarding at Costco. There's a lot more to this than just a piece about curb skating. How did you originally pitch this story and how did it evolve?
So thanks for having me. I have a Mostly Skateboarding sticker on my board, so thank you so much. I started skating Costco on weekdays a couple of years ago, and I had two kids and weekends are just tough. So I went into work one day kind of sweaty. So I packed this bag of, change of clothes or whatever. There's not a shower at work, but, just kind of change and that's good enough. And the guy, his name's Manny Fernandez, who runs the bureau in LA. He's not my boss, but he's kind of the presence there. And he asked me what I had been doing to be, sweaty or whatever. And I said I was skateboarding. And so then we just went through the thing that every skateboarder knows. It's like, where were you doing? I was skateboarding. Where were you skateboarding? Costco. What do you mean Costco? Costco? What do you mean? Well, there's a curb there. A curb? Just that whole thing, right? So finally he said to me, he's like, oh, you should write about it. And I was like, I don't know about that. Maybe not. Let me just think about that, So I did talk to some people who skate there. And I was like, oh, do you think this would be okay? It could be fun, but it also might not be fun. And, if you want to participate, it would be cool. But if you don't want to, I'll just shine it. And it's no big deal. And a couple of people said, sure, I'd love to talk, whatever. So that was how it started. And I would say the first version of the story was sort of like, I like to think it was a better version of a newspaper article discovering a phenomenon than one not written by someone who skateboards. But it was still basically that thing, like, here's a Costco and people skate there and it's kind of famous and whatever, right? It was, I hope it was the best version of that it could have been, but that was basically what it was. So then for various reasons that are too complicated to get into, it ended up moving to the business desk, which is who employs me. And I ended up going to another editor and we were like slacking about the story. And I was like, I had this friend I used to skate with curbs. I used to skate curbs with, and he died, and it was horrible. And as soon as I moved down to LA, I was like very determined to get into a new scene because I just wanted to keep in touch with that. And she said, "Oh, you should put all that into the story." So I did, and then that's when it took on a whole new life of its own. So that's kind of a long explanation, but that is how it happened.
Conor, thanks for being on the show. A follow-up question to that. Skateboarding is in a very interesting place culturally right now. And it's cool, but at the same time, the industry and skate culture is within transition. And yet you were able to really zero in on a part of skateboarding that has not been as subject to a lot of the cultural and industrial tumult in skateboarding. Do you think that helped make the story easier to sell? That you weren't trying to jam in references to the Olympics or to Tony Hawk or anything like that, but that really this was a story about friendship, about bonding, and about having something outside of school, work, and home life?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think ultimately it just was a story about trying to stay connected to something and then losing a friend and a member of a found family, which every skateboarder has. And so I think that resonated. I think if it had been a story about skateboarding, as in skateboarding, the activity that and industry and all that, it wouldn't have sold as well. When I say sold, editors would not have been as receptive to it. I mean, I will say and if you look at the comments on the story, and then I got a million emails essentially saying the same thing. There were all these people who were like, "Oh, I'm trying to stay with skiing, or I'm trying to stay with mountain biking, I'm trying to stay with golf." So a lot of people sort of like resonate with this idea of feeling like when your time is limited in a particular sport, it's more meaningful. And I think there's something sort of like, if all goes well and I'm fortunate to live a long life, skateboarding will end for me as an active sort of thing, presumably a fair amount of time before I actually die. So there's something sort of interesting about knowing that you might have to leave something behind. And I was originally just sort of obsessed with this idea of like the last time doing something. And so I was just kind of playing around with that idea. To answer your question, I think that largeness of like mortality and trying to stay connected to things, like it could have been a story about golf or anything else. I would also note, just as an aside, I wrote a story about a year ago. I had 2 stories now on skateboarding for the business section, which I don't know how I have gotten away with that, about UN Plaza in San Francisco and how they made it like a skate park to clean up, kind of drug dealing and other things in that spot. But I think the reason that story resonated as well was that it wasn't really about skateboarding. If they had turned it into, a checkers tournament area or whatever, I don't know, anything, if they had just taken that plaza and made it active with a constituency of users, skateboarders or anything else, the story would have still been valid, because the whole point is that like when you build these big plazas and nobody does anything in them, they attract bad activities. So I guess my point here is like, I always like my skate stories to be not actually skate stories. And so I think this one was like that.
My guess is the New York Times also prefers your skate stories to not just be skate stories, or anybody, writing about anything. I think, is that a valid critique? Like they kind of want the story to be more than just the thing.
I would say so. I mean, I obviously the New York Times publishes all sorts of pieces every year of, 50,000 or something. I don't even know what it is, but it's in that, area. And some of them are, short political stories about a specific development. Others are, short business stories about a specific development, whatever. But I think the larger stories, whether they're in politics, business, culture, whatever, typically are trying to capture an audience of people that are not just of that thing. So, obviously if you could read you could read a big political story that might actually be about, people's anger about the end of blue collar work or something. You know what I mean?
So tapping into that thread right there, how do you frame this against the perceived crisis of male loneliness?
It's funny you should say that. I talked to Foss. I talked to a bunch of other people for this story. Ira, people who were quoted, people who weren't quoted. And that came up time and time again. And I wanted that to be like encased in the story, but not to like hit you over the head too hard with it. And so when I was like writing it and I had like quotes to that effect, it always felt like this is just a little too on the nose. So I think that skateboarders, a guy from Costco actually DM'd me after I wrote the story, and he was like, skateboarders are blessed. He wrote something like, skateboarders are blessed to have 10 third places or something like that, and I was like, yeah, it's so true. Like if you stick with skateboarding, your, loneliness, whether it's male or just general, any gender loneliness, like is pretty much gone away. You know what I mean? I mean, we've all had this experience. Like you have like a bad day at work and you go skate with your friends and it's just like, it just melts away. You know what I mean? And I understand why if someone didn't have that, it would be completely debilitating to them.
So question for both of you then. What is wrong with American society that we are cultivating this loneliness? Why is it us skateboarders who, in the wider lens of pop culture, whatever, are viewed as these damn skate rats, blah, 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 but now being upheld as y'all are actually building community, you're spending time, you have third places, you have an interest. What's wrong? What has created this? What has created this? I know I'm like leaning towards bowling alone here, but I feel like that's only part of it. I feel like something else is wrong and I can't quite figure out what it is.
Man, that's a big question.
That is a big question.
I wonder if there's less of an appetite for risk. Like skateboarding has like the obvious risks of like, if you try a trick, you might not land it and you might fall down. But, the risk of like going out in public and talking to people, like there's just like less appetite for risk maybe. And maybe that's part of it. I don't know. That's just a theory I came up with right now. Connor, you got anything?
Yeah, I think there could be a million answers to this, and I don't really know. Trying to have one thing is sort of fraught. But I do agree with your risk thing. Like for instance, I had a party the other night. I wanted to do like one of these parties where you have someone have like a conversation, you know what I mean? Like, so you just invite a bunch of people over and then one person kind of talks about a thing and people kind of ask questions. And I had over the food critic for the Times. And we just kind of talked about restaurants and food trends, restaurant labor stuff, just whatever anyone wanted to ask. And it was really fun. In the moments before people came over, I had this like tremendous anxiety about like, oh my God, will anyone actually show up? Does anybody think I'm stupid? Is this sort of weird to have like a conversation in your living room? You know what I mean? It was that thing you're saying. It was like risk, social risk. Like, wow, I'm kind of putting myself out there. And I sent this whole invite out. And what if no one, just freaking out about it. And I guess at some point I just sort of decided like, oh, that anxiety is what it like actually feels like to be alive. And so it's not something to be scared of. It's like the actual thing. So I agree with you. There is some weird sense of risk associated with like socializing and everything. I mean, I think people live farther. I do think, I don't really know. I have no idea. It's some combination of proximity, busyness. I mean, I will say like, kids kind of force you to socialize. So that could be part of it.
Those are great answers. I think the only thing I would add to it, and you guys have actually sparked something in my brain here, is something like skateboarding and a lot of other hobbies, passions, are imperfect. They require time, they require effort, and you're not always going to be good at it. And we're living increasingly in a time that is, we're always being beat over the head with this idea of perfection and optimization, which I could really give a shit about. And skateboarding isn't those things. You could go out with the best of intentions and not land a thing. You could just be warming up and, oh my God, you could body one of your best friends who lands every trick first try in a game of skate. Sometimes there's an element of randomness to it. And as skaters, we've internalized that we're content with it. We wouldn't be skateboarders if that wasn't, if we weren't comfortable with that. I guess I just wonder how so many people fall into this optimization trap when life is not optimal. This like the idea that you're going to have this frictionless existence is stupid.
I know, it's crazy too, because they want you to do. It's funny. I was telling someone about this the other day. I went to Portland once, Templeton, your area, and I did my bachelor party there. And we went skateboarding at various parks there, and I went to go get a coffee one morning at this coffee shop, and this person. I was like, can I have like the darkest one you have? Because they had like all the coffees written on a butcher paper or something like that. And they were like, and this person goes to me, they go, we don't have dark coffee here because you just taste the char. Like just this full judgment about me trying to order dark coffee. And I was joking to someone after, I was like, I don't want to be an expert in coffee, beer, cheese, like everyone is like you see this with like the way people talk about a TV show, like it has to be like they're a critic all of a sudden. And like there are certain things like that I just want to just like be, you know what I mean? Like anyway, that's probably not making sense. But my point is like everything has this very heightened thing like that, and it can make things feel intimidating. And you know what? Back to the subject of skateboarding, I feel like skateboarding allows us to, I think skateboarding's like kind of chilled on that a little bit. Like, you go to a shop like Kingswell, which is on the surface, a pretty cool place. They got really nice clothes and, cool things. It's a very warm place. They're super friendly. Like if somebody comes in, like not knowing what skateboarding is, they're like kind of will guide them, and they don't cool guy people. And you know what I mean? And I feel like shops today are pretty intelligent about that, whereas, yeah.
They have to compete with online, like there was a time when you were getting cool guy at a shop, there was no other way to get a skateboard. So you just had to, take whatever abuse you got. But now if you get cool guy at the shop, you can turn around and go get a board on Amazon or whatever. So there may be an economic motivation to not cool guy people anymore.
There definitely is. Yeah.
I don't miss that. I really, really do not miss that. And also it's quite sad too. It's like, really? Like, dog, I'm just trying to spend money in here. What, cool guying or not cool guying?
Cool guying, being cool guy, it's totally fine to me. Anyway, back to the article. I feel like any article about skateboarding has to mention Tony Hawk. Yours is no exception. Connor, was that something that the editor pushed for?
No, I did that. I mean, look, the skateboarder in me wanted to like do some like encyclopedic like research project paragraph about like, I originally wrote this paragraph that was sort of trying to play with this idea that like each era of skateboarding can kind of be reduced to a spot or could be symbolized by a spot, maybe not reduced to it. But, like if you're thinking early 90s, you're thinking about Embarcadero. Obviously, there was so much stuff happening in LA and all these other places. But EMB just kind of became, oh, okay, that's emblematic of like what was happening then, right? And so I kind of was like trying to play with this idea of like, but then when I tried to go, it just got a little too granular. So in my head, I was kind of like, all right, I want to sort of show the transition from, pool, skate park, vert, whatever, to like street being the dominant voice. And I kind of thought those two things would do that. I mean, obviously saying Tony Hawk felt like it resonated with a broader audience. But I mean, it's kind of like I have zero qualms with trying to bring in more people to a story because of the recognizability of Tony Hawk. Like if you're like completely shoehorning it in there, you're like, oh, we're skateboarding curbs instead of playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater or so, like that would be dumb because nobody's really doing that. But it's totally true that Del Mar and the scene that catalyzed totally like revolutionized and ultimately set the foundation for all that explosion in the 80s. So, and then obviously EMB, and then it felt like curb skating could fit within that framework. Not, in fact, by the way, there was actually originally this whole thing about like how like curb skating is sort of like, it's like some people would disagree with this, but it's like you're essentially regressing. Although again, we could address this question. Whereas like every other skate spot has some sort of progression or refinement associated with it. Like Love Park wasn't like crazy progression, but it like refined everything to like an extremely styled version. Like people were no longer figuring out tricks; they were like completely perfecting them.
Right.
So, anyway, you get what I'm saying. So I put that in there. I totally did that and I thought it worked. So whatever. And I am unabashedly trying to write for a larger audience.
So why would you call curb skating regressing?
I knew someone was going to say that. I don't know. It's funny. I got an email from someone today that was like, I feel like curbs are actually just the purest expression of skateboarding. And I actually think people aren't regressing. I don't know, because I guess because like in my brain, I was skating ledges and then I was like, oh my God, this is a pain in the ass. Let me skate curbs. So it's funny because
I totally agree with you. I think that curb skating is regressive for me anyway.
You can do more tricks on a curb. So in that sense, I've learned all sorts of things, but I'm not attempting to take those anywhere else. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I think for me, like I can still do more tricks on a ledge. Like I can't slappy into a back 50. I can in like one place, but I'm just such a better ledge skater than I am a curb skater. So it is like learning a new discipline of skating. So in that respect, I guess it's not regressive, but it does feel regressive to me. Patrick, you were saying.
Yes. So kind of pivoting over to the sadder and more difficult part of the story. As I was preparing for today's podcast, I read an essay by the author Michael Azerrad, who wrote a great book about Nirvana back in the day. And also wrote a lot about the Seattle scene. And it's called Crying at the Feelies Show. For the uninitiated, the Feelies are a wonderful band, punk/post-punk era from Hoboken, New Jersey, who've broken up, gotten back together again. And the final paragraph in this essay, he went to the band's 50th anniversary show. And he says, I'm actually thankful to know that was probably the last time I'll see the Feelies, because one doesn't always get such clarity about that sort of thing. Sometimes you don't know it was the last time you'll ever see a favorite band or a favorite pizza joint or a favorite city or a favorite friend. So as the late Warren Zevon once said, as he was dying, enjoy every sandwich. So Conor, once again, condolences for your loss, but what was it like to kind of process the loss of a good friend and framing that against skateboarding and doing it so publicly, to grieve so openly? This is within your profession. We've all read it and We've all been there, and we're going to keep going there because, we're all in our 40s. Talk to us about writing about loss in such a public forum.
Yeah. So let me start by saying I love what you just shared there about that guy. And this concept of the last time was very resonant in this piece. Little inside baseball here. During COVID, I kind of went crazy. Everyone went crazy, but I did too. And I was really like busted up about the whole thing. I felt like all that anxiety and craziness and shut-in syndrome and all the things. And I, for various reasons, just really, really wanted to kind of get into meditation when I was feeling down. And so I started doing a lot of meditation, I wouldn't say seriously into that, but doing it pretty regularly and developing a practice and whatever. And one of the things they're always telling you to do in meditation is these last time meditations, sort of exactly what you shared in the essay, that in the case of the Feelies, that's a pretty epic moment for that author. But, if even something you hate, it takes on incredible significance if you literally know or think you're doing it for the last time. Right. Very mundane moments, they're just, and I think the whole point there, and this definitely relates to skateboarding, is you are, you're there, you're with it, you're mindful, you're not thinking about other things. You are in the moment of your life at that moment. You're not lost in thought. So I think skateboarders uniquely have that thing. I mean, every time you try a trick, you are locked in a way that's beyond language, that's beyond whatever, it's just your consciousness or whatever. And that's tapping into that, even just for a microsecond, is a really incredible thing. And I think that's partly why skateboarding is so stress reducing. It's not just the physicality and all that. Like when you jog, you can kind of think about stuff. You cannot think about something else when you're trying a skateboard trick, unless it's something you have locked. And even then that would be weird. So I originally wanted the story it was definitely like inspired by that concept. And in original versions of the story, I kind of took a slightly more avant-garde approach to the writing, where it was organized around different versions of the last time of something. And many of the scenes I had are still in the piece, but they're sort of like, so there's this opening scene where you have this guy, Jason Filippo, and this guy, David Chaikin, who hung out with at Costco one day. Those guys got arrested in a municipal pool. It's really more like a wading pool. It's not like a pool like, Dogtown and Z-Boy's pool. It's like kind of a wading pool that had been drained in South Carolina, and they, put jump ramps and stuff in it. But there have been footage. It did have these banks, and I think there was a Thrasher cover there or something like that. But anyway, they were skating there one day and they got busted by the cops, hauled off to the police station in handcuffs. And I believe Jason was a minor at the time, and so got released first or whatever. So they're in this holding cell together, these, guys who skate together, and Jason leaves, and, David's just like, peace, later, whatever, just says something like, oh yeah, I'll see you tomorrow, or let's hang, or whatever, just something with the full expectation that they would hang again. They literally never saw each other again in the flesh for the rest of their lives until the day that I met them at Costco that day. So there was something so incredible about, you're off skating with your friend, you just kind of say, oh, later, let's hang again. And you might never see them again. You know what I mean? Like just something could happen. They move away, something, whatever. And I guess I just thought that was so interesting, kind of for the reasons you said, which is that they didn't know. They had the full expectation that they would skate again. And then, all of, significant amount of life from teenagehood to middle 50s, late 50s is just passes by, and then they see each other again. So then I guess I thought there was something so insane about my friend Victor, who was this incredible person and owned the shop where we hung out and really took on the role of the kind of coach or mentor or guide or whatever. And like a lot of good shop owners, he accepted that was the job of owning a shop. And just the idea that he went to a skate park one day, just threw his board down and was just like, that's it. It's over. It's done. There was something so difficult about that. And then when he and I hung out for the last time, if you've ever had a friend they've gone and had that conversation with, which I think a lot of people have, there was something so intense about walking away from someone knowing like, this is it. You know what I mean? And so I guess I kind of felt like as you get older and you lose tricks and you whatever, you are kind of always in skateboarding, or even just think about people who do an ender for, like, I don't know, is Mark Sutru going to go do, I don't even know what we call that trick, but a nollie heel flip, Sutru grind, like come out straight thing or whatever. Like, is that happening again? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But like, I think you're always thinking like, you're always like aware that this is like an ephemeral moment. You know, spots change, you know, they get jackhammered. Like, you know what I mean? You're always being faced with this idea that, oh, well, this day just lives here, you know? And I guess as for writing about something publicly and grieving about it, yeah, that part was, I hesitate to say it was hard. It just felt more like, I don't know, it felt more, the part where we saw each other for the last time and cried and all that just felt like slightly saccharine. So I was a little worried about that. I couldn't quite, it's not like you could leave that piece out because you have to sort of know what happened. But I will say that when me and Victor had our last conversation, I told him all this shit I wished I had told him, you know, earlier in life. I mean, it's the thing everyone says, right? But I was like, you know, I just really appreciate you, you know, kind of guiding us. And, you know, 16-year-old boys, I mean, there's a reason why for all of human history, they've like built armies out of those people. You know, like, there's a lot of very negative energy or potentially negative energy for, you know, and I'm not going to say we were perfect by any means, but, and I felt like he kind of kept that energy from getting totally out of control. And I sort of like was able to say like, hey, I remember like, I don't, this is like too long to recount, but there was like one time we were doing something like really shitty to one of our friends. And I remember him like yelling at us like, dude, you guys are like a gang. You cannot do that to your friend. You know what I mean? Like fuck with each other all you want. Like, you know, you can make fun of each other, but we had done something that way across the line. And he was like, dude, that you cannot do that within the group. You know what I mean? Or you know, and just kind of having someone who will take a moment out and give you those lessons. And I had never, ever, ever told him, you know, thank you for doing that. And so I was the animating force of the last time allowed that to happen. So, you know, anyway, I am sure I don't know if you guys have ever been through that, but a lot of people have been through a last conversation and it's a pretty uniquely intense thing.
Yeah. And I think something I struggle with right now as we're all getting older is that that's going to be a recurring thing in a much, much bigger way. You know, you resign yourself to the idea that, well, you know that your parents are going to die. I mean, that's just what it is. They're that much older than you. And I've lost some friends in younger years to a number of things, but now to be in your 40s where you figure that, hey, I was hoping that things would calm down. No, that's far from it. You know, I have a really good friend who's dying from cancer right now. And it's tough. Like, it's really, really, really tough. You know, you think about, you know what it is? It's this, especially if it's somebody you've been friends with since you were teenagers or even in your 20s, you're used to looking at that person, looking at your friendship, your relationship through the lens of that invincibility that you felt when you were a kid. And that's gone now. I mean, that invincibility was just a feeling. It was never actually there, but nothing could hurt you. You could stay up all night. You could do whatever you wanted. You could get into trouble. You could go out on missions. And so to see that friend in such a frail state, when in your mind you're just thinking, it's like, oh no, we're going to go to this show and then we're going to go to this diner and then who knows what's going to happen. It's tough because you're not just facing your own mortality. It is also, it's a perception shift. You're realizing the passage of time. You know, it can even come up from something as trivial as, you know, routine health and, routine health check, a routine physical.
Yeah. And you would go crazy if you always thought that way. So it's not as if you really want every single moment of your life to be like that. But I don't know exactly what the right balance is. But I think one thing I've thought about, maybe bring it back to skateboarding for a second, is like, I feel like this is a slightly different change of topic, but like, I'm so not covetous of buildings and neighborhoods. Like, a lot of people are like super into historic preservation and stuff like that. And don't get me wrong, like obviously there are really significant buildings that should be, you know, whatever. But when things change physically in a city, I just am always like, I don't really care. And I think it's because skateboarding like you're always like at some spot and then they jackhammer it and then it's like, oh, well, that's gone now. Or, or me and Templeton skated this curb in Portland once. By the way, fun fact, Templeton's the last person I skated with before COVID. I was in Portland on book tour and we went and skated this slappy curb.
405 curbs.
Yes, which is a good curb. It's a very Portland curb because it's not easy and it's a little crusty and whatever. But I think that those curbs went away and then came back or something. But my point is things are always kind of going away and you just kind of move on,
Yeah, I think in skateboarding, like our, arenas or whatever, like we don't own them. And I think that's like one of the unique things about skateboarding is like our most important places are owned by other people and we just do not have control over them. And so we just have to be okay with losing those things, like losing access or like it gets bulldozed or whatever, Love Park, EMB, like all this stuff. It's just like it belongs to somebody else, even though we're the ones who've given those places meaning. So we're just used to it. So yeah, I think that we're a little more okay with losing historic buildings, or some of us are.
Yeah, but I think that's also, it shows the power of skateboarding. I think it's a much more realistic way to move through the world. Although on the flip side of that, you look at a place like EMB, there is no arena, no court, no pitch that has had the same impact on a sport or activity the way EMB has had on skateboarding. None.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. When Jacob did his book, I went up there. My dad is. I grew up in San Francisco before I went to middle school and high school in Napa. My dad still lives in Noe Valley, so I go up there a fair amount. And we were sort of talking about this, and I was talking to this. When I'm up there, I'm always talking to people for journalism stuff, and someone was asking me like, "Why are you up here?" And I was like, "Oh, EMB, skateboarding, whatever." And the person was like a political person in San Francisco. It was sort of like didn't know much about it, or they sort of vaguely understood it. They were relatively new to the city. So the early 90s was before their time. And I said to the person, I was like, the most interesting culturally relevant thing that ever happened in that plaza was skateboarding. And I was like, and I'm not trying to like, say skateboarding is the greatest thing in the history of the world or whatever. But it is just inarguable that the most important like cultural contribution to the city that took place there was skateboarding. I mean, I don't even have to like debate that. You know what I mean? That's just like true.
Yeah. I mean, what? Who other than U2 fans remembers that concert where Bono spray painted something on the fountain? On the sculpture.
Yes, totally. By the way, I remember when I was a kid, and my friends' parents like went to that and they came home where we're talking about that. But anyway, also the other thing is, and this now we're off into some, different philosophy, but like there were lots of really important things that sporadically happened in EMB. I mean, there were AIDS marches and I think there was there might've been a die-in or one of those things. There was, a bunch of stuff with AIDS happened there, like really, really important cultural things that arguably were more important than skateboarding. But those things were not like the life of the place. They're not associated with the place. They could have been in some park. You know what I mean? They were not continuous uses of the place. Does that make sense? Like there's something.
Yeah, it was a one-off.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't like a home of skateboarding. Or I'm sorry, it was a home to skateboarding, and that made it so important. So I don't know how we ended up here, but it is interesting how spots end up like kind of authoring the moment that skateboarding is in. One thing I was a little worried about when writing this article was that like, I know there's some people who are, I don't know, kind of annoyed at all the attention like older guys are getting in skateboarding. But my answer to that, not that anyone brought that up here, but is like, it is the responsibility of each generation to, metaphorically speaking, like murder the one ahead of it. And I feel like the kids aren't murdering the old people as well as they should be. You know what I mean? Like kids aren't skateboarding. They aren't skateboarding and doing all sorts of things. I mean, maybe they are, and I'm just not seeing it on TikTok or whatever, but it just doesn't feel, I mean, you go to a skate store, you go to skate spaces, there are younger people there, but they're not like taking it over the way they kind of should be. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of twofold. I think that the youth are maybe a little less interested than our generation was, and I also think that our generation has a much tighter stranglehold on skateboarding, so to speak. I think it's a lot harder to break in. Like companies basically have kind of stayed relevant longer than they did when we were first starting. So there's like who's going to take out Deluxe? Like Deluxe is still kind of the best.
Totally.
They're like Santa Cruz or Powell for our generation. Like they should be like old news or whatever, but they're still the best. Like Spitfire. You're not going to find better wheels.
No, totally. And to be clear, I don't necessarily like. It doesn't like bother me. I don't necessarily want to see companies go out of business or whatever, because I do think it's generally healthy for a company to know what they're doing, to have the capacity for investment, whatever. But I don't know. I don't see like things that are freaking me out to the degree that I think I freaked other people out. So anyway, I think it is interesting. I guess this is all about like third places and all these things, but I do. Oh, you were saying one of your questions you wrote me was, have I done my last 360 flip? Have I done my, and one thing I think I do a kickflip every single time. I don't know about every single time, but I usually do one kickflip every time I go to Costco. And I do it kind of getting back to Patrick's thing. I don't really like doing them anymore. I'm not very good at them. Every now and then I'll get a good one, but there is this thing where I'm like, maybe that's the last one. You know what I mean? And I go through this like weird exercise each time, almost as like a clarifying thing, like, oh, that might be the last one right there. And then the next day I go back, or 3 days later or whatever, and I go, well, maybe that's the last one. And there's something so like, I don't know, Tony Hawk has done a bunch of these things where he'll be like, that's probably my last 900, that's probably like my last 720, that's right. You know what I mean? And there's something so, I don't know, I kind of love it, even if it's sort of sad. So
man, I hate it, because like to me it's the 360 flip, and like I do kick flips every session for kind of the same reason. Like I gotta make sure I still have it. And the 360 flip, I try every session. And there's more sessions now where I don't land one than I do. And that's like scary to me, like the 360 flip is kind of like, I think of the 360 flip as like one of the few tricks that I can do that a pro would film. Like it's okay to do a 360 flip on flat in a line. You know what I mean? Like any video part, that's totally acceptable. And I can do that trick and that feels good. And to lose that would really bum me out. But I do think maybe I did my last 360 flip, and it was like 3 weeks ago, and it kind of sucked. And like, I just do not like that feeling. But I do think that if I put my mind to it, like I can 360 flip. Like I could go 360 flip right now. It might take a while. It would probably be shitty, but I know I could do it. And I feel that way about most tricks. Like I could probably do most tricks. Maybe not a frontside flip. I think that's probably long gone, and I don't even remember my last frontside flip. I'm sure it was shitty. So that's kind of where I'm at with those things. Patrick, do you think about the last time you maybe have done a trick?
No, for whatever reason, and probably because I don't have as deep of a bag of tricks as y'all do, I'm just grateful to be on a board. And so if it means going out and doing some slappies, if it means just skating flat with some friends, I am content with it. Maybe that's lazy on my part, but in my own defense, I do feel that the space for me to constantly be pushing for progression is more music than skateboarding. I know that there are physical limitations to whatever is going to happen with regards to skateboarding, but I know that with music, I can keep pushing myself and I keep learning new things. And maybe it's lazy, maybe I'm not applying myself enough, but I guess I'm content at age 44 to be like, hey, this is what it is. That being said, amongst friends, I am always open to be pushed, to try something, to get well outside of my comfort zone. And I think that's where I get it from. And I don't know what I'm going to be called upon to try when we go out on a session or if we go to a park. And so maybe that's where I get my excitement nowadays.
Yeah, I think one thing I thought about in this conversation that kind of relates to what I was trying to get at in the story is that I was thinking to myself a couple years ago, and you've already sort of started to see this happen, but it would be interesting to see like the way that skateboarding has always been marketed, or at least for the most part, I mean, there are exceptions here and there, so I'm not going to use the superlative, but generally speaking, the marketing has always been team-based pros, who are good at skateboarding. And there've been variations of that, and a team is often has a diverse range of talent, and there's not always is someone quote the best and whatever, right? But being extremely good on a skateboard has always been and not even just extremely good, like to the level of basically being professional. You are elite amongst, anytime you go on a demo, you probably should be better than the local kid. And I kind of feel like while I love that piece of skateboarding, it sometimes feels like the community aspect of it could be a little bit more front and center in the marketing. I don't know exactly, that's for somebody else to figure out, but I look at what Heroin has done, and it was funny when I'll leave this anonymous, but when I was talking to someone about the story, they were like, I don't like this. It feels like the culture is being diluted in some way or something. And I'm like, I feel like it's interesting to see a company marketing like, yeah, this is what skateboarding actually is. It's you hang out with your friends. It's not the best person. But I mean, Ira is super good on curbs, but as he will tell you, he's not like going to be in the Olympics or whatever, and I just feel like it would be interesting. It is interesting. And I think you're starting to see companies sort of take a different form of marketing about like what skateboarding is about. And I really like that. You kind of subtly already see it with, there's all sorts of people who I'm not going to name, but there are all sorts of people who are really, really good skateboarders, but they're not, I remember a friend of mine once said, well, that guy's good enough to watch. And I was, and so there, even within skateboarding, even within quote pro skateboarding, there is some recognition that like trying to be like the fully elite handrail chomper is already a game that people are, nobody wants a part of outside of a small group of people. So I actually think it would be, you guys could probably tell me who this is. There's a person on Vans, I think is a non-binary person, but who just rips at the level of like normal, but rips, and I just remember thinking like, wow, this is so cool to see someone marketed this way who's definitely good, very good, was probably the best person at a lot of spots they go to, but also isn't necessarily being marketed as the best. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is this, like, it would be, we are in this tunnel of good because that's the way it's been presented to us. But to some extent, skateboarding is like more like skiing or something like that, where, I mean, there are obviously pro skiers, but people do not go skiing giving a shit about the like downhill skiing at the Olympics. You know what I mean? Like, it's ultimately a thing people do. And the industry has always kind of been, at root, an industry that is like, there aren't skateboarding fans. I'm sure that there's somewhere in the world there are skateboarding fans, but not really. And it's a thing that ultimately you have to do or be part of or have some kind of connection to. And it feels like skateboarding ultimately belongs to those people. And the industry is, lives or dies on that participation and that engagement and that being of the thing. And so anyway, this is all just a very long way of saying I really love the way some of these curbs and heroin and all this stuff is marketed. It doesn't have to be curbs. It could be a million other things. But because it's essentially celebrating like the things that I love about skateboarding, which is just going skateboarding. So,
I mean, I'll say, I think we've always kind of marketed skateboarding as like hang out with your friends or like having adventures. Like, I don't think it's always been about who's the best, because really there's only like one best if you're going to really come down to it, like there's a handful of people that you can argue about who are the best. But like Search for Animal Chin, that's like a buddy film, basically. It's about hanging out with your friends. You got Lance Mountain, who's like obviously not the best, but many people's favorite skater. So I think it's always been about friends and stuff.
Yeah, although I gotta say, just for the record, people always bring this Lance thing up. I hate that shit. And here's why. Lance Mountain is a fucking ripping skateboarder. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like when I was a kid and I saw Lance Mountain, I sure as hell didn't think to myself like, oh, well, he's relatably good. You know what I mean? Like, there's no world in which I thought that. Like, I suppose if you were having some like debate, you'd be like, oh, Tony Hawk does so many more tricks than Lance Mountain. But I certainly did not like look at Lance and think like, wow, I could do that. I mean, there's no world in which anything like that was happening. So it's always funny to me that people bring this up because I'm like, that's like a weird ass metric. You know what I mean? Like he was like, it just always felt to me like that narrative has always sort of seemed, whereas you watch some of these curb guys and you definitely think like, I could probably pull that off. You know what I mean? Like, or maybe I couldn't pull that off, but I could pull something else off that's pretty good. Or do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's a different kind of relatable, if that makes sense. So
I get that. I point taken.
Another funny thing you asked in your questions, which was, and I just thought it'd be fun to talk about, but you said, did you and Peter Venkar almost quit skating? And the answer is definitely. I will never forget this. I was in New York and I'd had a board. Maybe I wrote it once a year or something. I never really did. I just gotten a job at the Wall Street Journal. I moved from San Diego to New York. I felt like I had a big opportunity to sort of take my career to a next level. And I just had my whole brain focused on that at that time. And New York's like a hard city to skate in. So I wasn't sure how to navigate it without like a built-in crew. So I was just like, this is a lot. You know what I mean? So then my friend Jason, who is at medical school at the time, or he was in residency in New York, he came down and then we met Peter and then our friend Paolo. And we were like, and I was like, okay, let's go. I'm going to go buy a complete. So I went to Autumn, bought a complete. They of course probably thought I was like some, idiot in, a shirt and tie or whatever, but I bought a complete board and we were like, let's just go skate. So one day we went to LES, which was the old LES when it just had the like metal box and a few other things. And I could like barely ollie. I just felt like awkward on my board. And it was just so bad. And somewhat ironically, contrary to today, I was in truly the best shape of my life. I was, quite a bit slimmer. I ran a ton, like cardiovascularly and strength wise. I probably never been in better shape than I was at that time. But it just was all the muscle memory was gone. It was totally awkward. I think I might have been 30. I mean, I was still young. So we started skate this like two-stair, but it was like a two-stair that's you could skate it like a manual. And I was like, oh my God, I can't even like ollie up this right now. It just feels so weird, And again, I'm sure my vertical leap was higher than it had ever been. It just was gone. Like the whole skateboarding thing was gone. And then me and Peter went to this other manual pad that was like, barely half the height of a curb. And I would like ollie it and kind of manual it a little bit. And I just was like, oh, just anything to just feel sort of, it was such a bizarre feeling because it was just gone, but had nothing to do with like physical limitations. And then, and this is where this is what I want, my message to anyone who's thinking about getting back in it, although I don't think that many people, is the next weekend we went skating and it just started coming back. Like it was like, oh, like my brain kind of like something between sleep and other things just started bringing it back. And the next session I did a nose grind on a ledge, which was kind of my trick. And then I could just feel it coming back and it was on. But there was that day and me and Peter were like, I literally remember saying to Peter, I was like, is this it? Like we're skating this like half the height of a curb manual pad and it feels hard. And I don't even know what the hell this is. And we were up against it. I totally thought to myself, like, do I even want to do this? And then
I've definitely had sessions like that where I'm like, dude, why am I out here?
Well, just open the floodgates. And it's crazy because like the whole second half of my life from that day has been just so amazing. I mean, all the friends I've had and all the, but that day it was like a real crossroads. It was like, oh, maybe I'm just going to do another thing. And then we got back into it and then it just opened it up and it was like magical. But
most of us are not prodigies. And so we're not just going to be able to get things back after a long time away instantaneously. That's just part of life. And I think that terrible first session back lit a fire under you. Same thing happened to me on my 30th birthday. I went skating at the Shaw Park in DC, which was not too far from my house, quick bike ride away. And I hadn't skated in a couple of years. I had finished grad school. I was playing in bands, and so I was trying not to get injured. And so I was really focused on music and DJing and writing. And so skateboarding had just fallen by the wayside. And I think the only time I skated between age, 23 or 24 and 32 was that time, 30th birthday. And then also I beat some dude in a game of skate while wearing boat shoes at a party. And that to me was ultimate bragging rights. Like I was in the Sperry topsiders and skinny jeans and bodied this dude.
That's amazing. I mean, it's funny. I beat a guy in skate once around that time. I mean, I could do backside flips, nollie flips, some other things at that time. So I couldn't beat I couldn't really beat someone in skate, but if you got into it with someone like around your level, I could. By the way, one thing we were talking about that, why kids don't skate anymore or whatever. I think one thing that is somewhat lost here, and I was thinking about this the other day. So I live in Studio City in LA, and there's a bunch of high schools nearby, schools nearby. And I've seen this in other cities, so I assume everyone else. I see kids e-biking everywhere now, and they look like little motorcycle gangs and whatever. I kind of love it. And I mean, everyone hates it, but I love it. And they look kind of tough and whatever. And it makes me realize how much the transportation aspect of skateboarding was a piece of what I was doing. I absolutely never thought of my skateboard as transportation, to be clear, but I definitely was like traversing the city and going to meet, girls and going to play Street Fighter at a particular like place or going to a comic book store, and you would do tricks along the way, you would skate things along the way, you would skate the curbs in front of those places, but like going between places and doing things was definitely a piece of what sustained me in skateboarding through that period where you were still sort of awkwardly learning. And I sometimes wonder if, that piece of it, and you start to get balance, I remember when I first got to the point where I could like very fluidly ollie up a curb or, around the city, to me, you just ollie up every curb and, like that was a big moment. And I sometimes wonder if, these days kids are being driven more places, they're, whatever. And I just sometimes think the transportation aspect is actually the hidden gateway drug.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting way to look at it. Because, I definitely traversed a few different suburbs on skateboards to go buy cigarettes with my friends at the one Quickie Mart that didn't card and stuff. Yeah, transportation was part of it for sure. Bikes would have been way better as pure transportation to do that task.
Yeah, totally. By the way, the number of people who learned how to skateboard in our generation between trying to find places that would sell you cigarettes, that's like a whole episode right there for you.
Right.
Because I definitely, that was a huge piece of the puzzle.
Are we going to get somebody from Big Tobacco to come and guest and talk about, it's going to circle back to our discussion about the Marlboro swag?
I know, right? It's funny. Although it's funny, this is something I've been thinking about lately is like the most legit trouble I got in. The one time I almost went to juvie in high school, I had broken my leg skateboarding. And that was when I really fell in with the wrong crowd. And there was like, when I was growing up, there was always these like kind of skater and kind of, this will bring us back to my friend Victor. There was always this like kind of skater adjacent crowd, people who could kind of skate, but were like into doing like acid like all the time. You know what I mean? Like whatever bad shit you got into, that was like their whole identity. It wasn't like an occasional thing that happened. And it felt like the people who fully skated and made skateboarding very central to like, and this is where the animating feature of like trying to get better is actually pretty helpful. The people for whom that was like something that really mattered to them, there was only so bad you could get. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty of pros who have, there are obviously plenty of people who've gone off the rails. But I just meant in general, I always felt like this pursuit of trying to get a lot better and trying to be very serious about skateboarding being sort of central to your thing, it kind of kept you it kept you straighter than you otherwise would have been, I would say. And I felt
right.
like
It's not
Victor,
it's not like the idle hands. Like your hands are very busy with skateboarding, so you're not looking for some other way to occupy your time by doing graffiti or whatever.
Yeah.
In the 90s, there was a lot more of teenagers getting into wild shit. Didn't matter if it was the city or the suburbs. And in retrospect, I realized, I was talking to a good friend of mine about this over the weekend, that especially in skating, and I don't blame skateboarding, it's just that when you're skateboarding, you're not at school, you're not at work, you're in play, you're out and about. And so you get into shit. And some people never really quite make it out. But I realized, through that conversation, I was like, man, I saw some wild shit as a teenager. In some cases, I saw fights that were crazier when I was a teenager than, say, in my 20s. And in my 20s, I was outside.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's funny. I remember the first time I saw a fight, like a legit fight. As everyone realizes, like it was over so fast. And the guy who lost was so bloody. You know what I mean? Like it was honestly kind of horrifying. I remember thinking like, whoa, because like fighting was like a cool thing people did. But like I'd never really seen one go down where serious violence occurred. It was usually like a lot of headlocks or whatever. And I remember the first time I saw one in 8th grade, I was like, holy shit. Like it was like this very eye-opening thing about how brutal and, if you're really going at it with someone, how horrific it is. And I remember being like, wow, that's not as cool as I thought it was. I mean, I very vividly remember it. And I think skateboarding did kind of keep you, and I think it's that community, and that's what Victor, and one thing I kind of was hoping we should all kind of talk about for a second is that role of the skate shop owner is underappreciated role. I think everybody, there have been a lot of like books over the years about like, someone who played basketball or baseball or whatever, writing about their like the coach who molded them, and my coach, that's like a memoir. I wouldn't quite call it a cliche, but it's definitely, there's a couple versions of it. And I feel like the skate shop owner is a very undersung. I mean, it's not like nobody's ever said skate shop owners are great, but that role that they take on as like, all right, well, because I'm running the scene now, I have to kind of like a little bit set an example. Victor at that time, he did. I mean, I had beers with him later in life, but like he very decidedly did not drink or do drugs or anything like that when he was running the shop. And I'm almost positive that he did that because he wasn't super interested in drinking, but he took the responsibility of like, basically I have children coming into my place of business and I'm creating a space for them. Like he very obviously took that quite seriously. And he wasn't like some kind of like, Dudley Do Right kind of guy. I think he just was like, oh, well, I'm doing this now. I'm running this business. The person I can be while I'm doing that is different than the person that I can or should be if I'm doing something else, And I just think that there is this kind of hidden responsibility of being a skate shop owner, and the people who really create a good, amazing scene. It would be interesting if Munzie was here because Minneapolis has such an incredible scene, and I bet you behind the scenes there's some shop owners somewhere, even predating Nesser, but like but that gets passed down each generation, and it's so crucially important to, I bet you, like if you could like find who those people are and encourage them and invest in them, and I mean, I'm obviously not only being half serious, but I think that the health of this whole thing, those people have they have a bigger role in it than I think we sometimes appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the skate shop is the cultural hub, and the running that is a big responsibility that stretches far beyond just selling products to customers. So shout out to all the skate shop owners and managers who are going above and beyond, being more than just a place that sells things. So Conor, thanks so much for being on the show. We're bringing it in for a landing. So we're at the part where we talk about what we're stoked on. Conor Dougherty, what are you stoked on this week?
Okay, stoked on. I got a little Shih Tzu that, with the theme of fuck cancer, my friend Victor died of cancer. My mother-in-law passed away of cancer, and I inherited her little Shih Tzu, and I was not a dog person, but this dog loves me now. And so accidentally, I've become a Shih Tzu lover, and it's really great. I'm also hyped on, as a skateboarding thing, my friend who's very handy showed me how to put on rails better. And what he does is he drills his screws halfway through, then pulls them out, and then takes a razor blade and cuts off the splinters as they, pop up when you guys don't skate rails. So, whatever.
Mm-mm.
And I was super hyped on it because it's the perfect way to install rails. And if you sand them down or you just razor blade them off, it keeps those splinters from popping up and kind of pushing your rails up a tiny little bit. And I was super hyped to have a new way to put on rails.
Nice. Patrick, what are you stoked on this week?
Woo, buddy. While yes, I am stoked on Spitfire wheels, especially the new collab that they're doing with Humidity Skate Shop in New Orleans. Shout out to Philly. I'm really only stoked on two things this week, baby.
I know where this is going.
Arsenal Football Club winning the Premier League and lifting the trophy for the first time since 2004. And before this show goes out, they will be going to the Champions League final for the first time since 2006. And yes, the New York Knicks are going to the NBA Finals for the first time since 1999. I am absolutely elated. I am over the moon. I cannot believe my sports fortune this week. I want it all. Give me more. Give me more. Templeton, what you stoked on this week?
I'm stoked on time off. I'm going to Chicago at the end of the week, but ended up taking off more time than I needed. So I've just got a little extra time around the house, which is really nice. And then, going to Chicago to see Belle and Sebastian this weekend and also to hang out with Mike. So super stoked on that. I'm sure Mike and I will have more to say about that later. That's it for our show this week. Be sure to check out mostlyskateboarding.net for links to things that we talked about and other show notes. Until next time, you can keep up with us all week online. Conor, where can the people find you?
I have nytimes.com, and I have a private Instagram, which is Coco Diggs, but there's really nothing too special there.
Patrick, where can the people find you?
You can find me on Instagram under the handle @Kigongo. And over the next couple of weeks, watching the Knicks.
Here we go.
Templeton, where can the people find you out on the internet?
You can find me on Instagram @Mostly Skateboarding, and you can find the show on YouTube @Mostly Skateboarding. We'll see you guys next week.
Later.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, Conor.